So last month at Mobile World Congress, HMD definitely caused quite a stir in the mobile community, not because of its line of Android-powered Nokia smartphones, but for one single phone in particular, which garnered probably the most attention, and that was the Nokia 8810. Now, this isn't a new strategy for HMD Global, who, interestingly enough, has been on this retro kick starting last year with the Nokia 3310. While we certainly love these throwback phones, it got us to really wonder about some other classic phones that we'd love to see get the updated treatment as well. Nokia wasn't the only major player in the phone space during the late 90s and early 2000s. We had notable makers like Sony Ericsson, Kyocera, Samsung, LG, and yes, even Motorola. Speaking of Motorola, that's who we're going to pay attention to in this piece. We know that they made the memorable Razr phone in the mid-2000s, but we're going to want to see the update treatment on another phone, and that's the Motorola MPx200. Now, you might be scratching your head and wondering what it is, and trust us, we don't blame you for doing that, just because that phone never reached the level of claim that the original Motorola Razr achieved during its run. The Motorola MPx200 was released back in 2003, and it's your traditional looking flip phone, although it is a little bit on the chunkier side. Now, what makes this phone unique compared to all the other phones released during its time was that it was the first GSM smartphone released commercially in the United States to be running Microsoft's Windows Mobile Smartphone 2002 platform. Now, this was a little bit before Motorola released the Moto Q, so with this phone, the MPx200, it's a flip phone and you really wouldn't think of it as a smartphone because of that, but it was. For a phone released in 2003, the specs of the MPx200 were pretty much cutting edge back then. It featured an LCD display with a resolution of 176 by 220 pixels. It had a secondary display as well, an 850 mAh battery. There is an IR port, which you'll still find in some phones today. It was powered by a Texas Instrument ARM OMAP 710 processor. It had a full-size SD card slot and a 2.5mm headset jack. So the question that remains is, how would this old school phone be updated for today's modern use? Well, for starters, I think it should stick with the same design. Just polish up the plastic, give it a little bit more luster and more that polished look. The overall size too should remain the same. They could probably make it slimmer or sleeker, but honestly, I think I would rather have a bigger battery in there so this phone can really last a long time. We're talking about like a week's worth of battery from a full charge. But besides that, I really can't think of changing design too much. Considering this is going to be an updated phone, it should include newer hardware as well. So that would include things like a micro SD card slot. You're going to have a standard 3.5mm headphone jack. And I think NFC would really prove to be useful for this phone. As far as the display is concerned, I think it should just have a higher resolution display. Don't make it touch enabled because that's not really practical for this type of form factor. But of course, like I said, increase the resolution so it's sharper, more detailed, brighter. And even though the original didn't feature a built-in camera, you know that this updated version should be rocking to one for snapping photos and the other for selfies and video chatting. And lastly, it should retain the jog wheel on its side because it's going to be useful for navigating around the interface. Seeing that this is a flip phone, the numeric keypad and the directional pad should remain unchanged from the original, and the directional pad of course should be flanked by the usual array of other buttons for navigation. And speaking of those navigation buttons, I think it should be shortcuts for back, home, and recent apps. And you probably know what I'm alluding to with this. And that leaves me to the software that's going to be running in this Motorola MPx200 update. I think it should be Android. Now, that's not crazy because Samsung already put out a flip phone running Android, so why not have this phone do the same as well? The problem that I have with HMD Global's updated classic phones is that they're technically still dumb phones. So if you're going to be using it for just conversing, it's great, but as a daily driver, I really wouldn't use either of them because I need something with a bit more substance. And that's exactly why this Motorola phone should be running Google's mobile platform. Obviously, it should be tweaked and skinned appropriately just to make the navigation a bit easier for the user. On top of that, it should really heavily rely on Google Assistant. We know the advantage of this personal digital voice assistant service. And being a flip phone, you don't have to worry about typing in long passages of text. You could just leverage Google Assistant to help you do that. As much as I would love for this old school phone to receive that updated treatment, the question that remains is whether or not you'd actually would buy one. For it to even stand a chance, I think that this phone should be priced under $100 just because we have such great phones already that are super low cost, under $200, that are full touchscreens and offer some of the basic amenities that we find in any smartphone nowadays. Even though the original phone didn't make a long-lasting impression in the space during its time, this modern reincarnation can certainly deliver the notoriety that deserved the first time around. And that's my quick throwback video here for the Motorola MPx200. What do you guys think? What changes would you like to see if a new version were ever made? Let me know in the comments and I'll check them out. So if you guys want to learn more about this phone, you can check out our website, PhoneArena.com. This is John V, signing off.